name is Michaela Faustine Rianto. I am from KESUMA Senior High School and I will be the second speaker of Government-Sided House. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels. It is incredibly saddening to see when a vulnerable country lost their harvest, suffered from floods, all for the sake of the profit for these high carbon emitting countries. Which is why, as government-sided house, this house would require high carbon emitting countries to compensate vulnerable countries most harmed by climate change. Before that, what do we want in this debate? As government-sided house, what we want is support for these vulnerable countries and a consequence for these high carbon emitting countries for exploiting nature itself. Before that now, let's see the actor in this motion. There are two actors in this motion, high carbon emitting countries and vulnerable countries. High carbon emitting countries are usually developed countries. Why? Because they're usually industry based, they have high production, etc. These countries usually are very profit driven and use nature as their very sources of income because they need resources for their production and factories. Now, these countries, example, are USA, China, Japan, India, etc. Secondly, the vulnerable countries. These vulnerable countries are usually developing countries because they have less resources and also their main income come from agriculture and natural resources, which is why they are the most harmed when it comes to climate change. Now, before going to my argument, I'll be going into my rebuttals. There are two rebuttals. First, it is not fair. Opposition side of the House said it's incredibly not fair to rob away the money that is having hard-earned by high carbon emitting countries. This is still justified because of two reasons. First of all, they produce a lot of it because of they are an industry-based country, have high production, and secondly, these money are produced based on nature, based on the exploitation of natures, and based on the harm that they have caused to these developing countries. Even if they don't purposely do it, all of this money still came from exploitation of nature, and all this money still exists purely because some of the and this money are all from nature itself. And all this money came from the carbon emission that they caused because of factors, etc. Now, secondly, that other country, including the vulnerable country, also produce carbon. Even though opposition could argue this way, it is still incredibly clear that vulnerable countries produce a lot less carbon than these high carbon emitting countries. Secondly, everyone have a role in stopping climate change. Even if everyone have a role, it is incredibly clear that even if these vulnerable countries have a role, they do want to, they just simply can't because of two reasons. They don't have the money and they need to prioritize other things like poverty, social issue, and others. It is clear that they obviously would want to help because they are the most impacted. So by using this motion, by giving them the funding resources it needed to fight against climate change, it is clear that this country would want to because they're the most impacted. Now, let's go to our argument. There are two arguments in this debate, justifications and benefits. First, justification. There are 5 layers to this argument. First, industrial-based countries that exploit nature for profit should be punished for this. Why they should be punished? Because there should be consequences for the action. There should be consequences for them for constantly using nature resources, for constantly emitting carbon. So they produce their main income and and they produce so many money, all based on nature and exploiting it. So they deserve to have a punishment or at least a regulation that prevent them from emitting carbons. Secondly, they blame third world country for climate change. Like I said before, they produce a lot of carbon because they have a lot of factories and they exploit nature a lot, yet they still blame other countries. They blame third world countries, like for example, demanding Indonesia to stop extracting oil from Kalimantan or demanding other countries to become eco-friendly. Even though these countries don't have the resources, it's incredibly unfair to just blame another country, even though they are an industry-based country and they emit a lot of carbon from their own productions and source of income. Thirdly, they don't do anything with their money. Like I said before, they produce a lot of money, they have an industry, and they're a developing country in general. Because they produce a very high amount of money and a high amount of profit, it is incredibly justified for them to use this money because they don't really use the money and the money is laying around. It is incredibly much more justified, practically beneficial in fact, to just give this money to developing country. There are many practical benefits which I'll explain in my second argument. Fourth layer, effect on developing country. The effect of climate change on these vulnerable countries is incredibly detrimental. For example, bad weather, floods, and loss of crops, which is incredibly important for them because it's their main source of income. So by losing one of these, by having a loss of crops, you essentially taking away the very main source of income for these countries. Now, benefits. But before I'm going, which is my second argument, but before I'm going to my second argument, let me explain a quick thing about how compensation will work. How would compensation work under our side of the house? First, there are two things: money and classification. How would money work? Obviously, money is quite clear. They're just going to get money. And classification will be classifying each country based on the carbon they're emitting, so it's quite clear which country contributes the most on climate change. Now, there are three layers in this argument. First, this distributed money will give poorer country or vulnerable country to the power to restore their restore their nature. First, how would this look like? They could build dams, they could replant trees, they could apply and research eco-friendly technology. Secondly, this will help to become the regulator for carbon emission for this high carbon emitting country, because if there is a severe punishment or consequence like money, they will try to stop themselves from producing too much carbon, emitting too much carbon. And third, these vulnerable countries are incredibly beneficial and also incredibly important for high carbon emitting countries. Like I said before, their main income in these vulnerable countries are natural resources. They also have very high human resources, which is incredibly important for any industrial country. Which means if high carbon if they are gone or they fall or have lower resources, it means that these high carbon emitting countries have less resources, less production, and less profit for this carbon emitting country. So it's quite clear that these vulnerable countries have a very great and significant role for the economy of high carbon emitting country, which is why it should be noted that they should be helped. Now, let's compare. On government side of the house, we have better way to protect this country. We have better resources for these. We have better resources for this vulnerable country to help protect themselves against climate change, and we have better stability in general. Now, under their side of the house, they have failed to protect these vulnerable countries, and they have continuously exploited nature without any consequences, and they might lose their own economic stability because they have lost the resource of the vulnerable country I said before. Which is why, as government side of the house, we proudly propose